Welcome to the Pain Relief Path podcast, where I dive into the vast world of chronic pain with the occasional help from knowledgeable guests from diverse disciplines that impact your chronic pain. I am your host, Dr. Pan Zhang, physical therapist turned chronic pain coach. I'm here to educate, empower, and encourage you to find your path to a pain-free life. Thank you for listening. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome back to Pain Relief Path podcast. Today, I have someone super exciting, my friend, Dr. Irene. She is the owner and founder of Mindor. And today's episode, we have a ton to dive in on. I'm really excited. I've been wanting to chat with Dr. Irene for a while because she is a vagal nerve expert. She does some really cool stuff with like biofeedback and chronic pain. And maybe we'll kind of touch on some microdosing in chronic pain. I know that's like a big topic in the chronic pain world these days. So really fun episode coming up. But Dr. Irene, if you would like to kind of introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and where you came from and what you're doing now, that would be awesome.
Great, thanks. Well, I'm excited to be here, Pan. I guess Dr. Pan, we're both doctors. So yeah, it's great to be able to share a little bit about some innovation, some things that we both have been doing in the chronic pain space. And so I started as a doctor of physical therapy. I've been in practice for 23 years now. About 10 years in, I started going more towards orthopedics. And so then I got my specialization in orthopedics. But very quickly after that, I joined the same program that you did. Back then, it was under Adrian Lau's company, International Pain and Spine Institute. And I got a therapeutic pain specialization. And then you went on to get your pain fellowship, which is awesome. And so lots of pain neuroscience education. And then I went on to develop a few more things based off of neuroscience, just learning more about neuroscience. And so I continued my studies from there, developed like kind of more broadly like kind of a brain training approach to chronic pain. And that's what I've been doing for the last, I would say, over 10 years.
That's awesome. And for everybody listening, this is like the stuff that we've gone through. It's so science-based. It's, it's really easy for people to like think of some of like the newer treatments for chronic pain as like a little woo-woo or something like that. But all the things that we're going to talk about are really truly science-based. They're evidence-based. They've been shown to work. And I can't say that we truly understand everything that we're talking about, not just us, but just like the medical community as a whole, because there's just so much more to learn about. And every time I learn a little bit more, and then like when I talk to people like you, it's like, oh, I didn't know any of those things. Like I didn't know this existed as a treatment option. It's so much fun because I get to learn so much. Yeah. So today, like I said, the big chunk of today's episode is going to be talking about the vagal nerve. So the vagus nerve has been something that has popped up a lot on a lot of social media channels. And, I think that there's a lot of information out there that may be good information that works for a lot of people, but I really want to stick to kind of the basics, like what is it actually? What does it do? How does it affect our chronic pain? And then we just get to go on a little adventure here and talk about all of that. So first question, Dr. Irene, what is the vagus nerve?
Yep, the vagus nerve is one of the 12 cranial nerves. So we have 12 of them, but two sets, so total of 24 nerves. Vagus nerve is number 10 of those, and they're cranial nerves because they come straight from the brain, and there's a very specific, they come through a very tiny hole in the base of our skull, all of them, and then they expand out into the body. Some of them are more located in the face, neck area, but vagus actually means wanderer, and it wanders all throughout our bodies, giving off a lot of different branches into our digestive system, into our cardiovascular system. And when we look at kind of like the primitive development of it, like embryology wise, because it comes straight from the brain, you can see how there's a brain gut connection and a brain heart connection, and also brain breathing connection. So when we look at its function, it's everywhere. It truly is the wanderer throughout the body.
Yeah. And I always talk about how your pain is not just in your body. It is a body and brain connection. In the vagus nerve, I mean, that is one of the main connections. It is a physical connection. So it's not just, everybody, when you first start your chronic pain journey in the regular healthcare system, you get the feeling that people are saying it's just in your head. It's not. There's literally a physical connection here that connects your brain and your body, and that is the vagus nerve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is that when it comes to chronic pain, there's a whole component within chronic pain that's such a visceral response to it, right? It's a protective response whenever we have pain. And often we're trying to help people unpack why you had that protective response, how to reduce that protective response if you are over responding to just everyday tasks, right? So you want to just be able to, get dressed in the morning, but you have such severe pain. And so that's a protective response over a task that should not have such a high response. It's no longer something that's fight or flight, but it's perceived as fight or flight in the body. So that's really where the vagus nerve intersects, because there's so many levels to how the vagus nerve responds in that protective state, and how to train, like, it's because it's an actual nerve, we can train the vagus nerve to help you come out of that fight or flight response, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, an even more primitive response than just fight or flight. So there's much to unpack there.
Cool. So let's get into just talking about that more primitive response than the fight or flight, because I talk about it a lot, just the fight, flight, freeze response, or the rest and relaxation response, because that is what most people have heard about, the sympathetic and parasympathetic responses. But I'd love to hear more about even deeper.
Yeah. So when we talk about the freeze response, is kind of that most primitive response.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot in neuroscience, there's actually lots that go into both the fight or flight and also the freeze response. How the vagus nerve fits in is that there's embryologically, there's two branches of the vagus nerve. There's the ventral vagus, which it means towards the front of the body. So ventral means like stomach side. Mm-hmm. And then dorsal vagus, which is the back side, so more towards the back. So that had two branches, one going to the front, one going to the back. And then those particular fibers are not, the remnants of the fibers are still there, but the branches are not. We only have one vagus nerve. So evolutionarily, we had these very primitive branches. A lot of this theory, if people want to know the science behind it, was developed by a psychologist. His name is Stephen Porges. And then his colleague, Stanley Rosenberg, wrote a book that's more practical use type things. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but those are the scientists behind some of this research. Now, when we're looking at the two branches, the dorsal vagus is actually involved in the freeze process. Mm-hmm. So the way that I like to teach on the vagus nerve is that you have a connected, feeling like everything is great in life, feeling like you're at your healthiest and happiest. And that would be more towards the ventral, the front side of the branch of the vagus nerve. Then you have your actual fight or flight response, which is your sympathetic system. It's a lot of different nerves happening all at once. And then there's this little branch, the dorsal vagus, that's involved in freeze. And we call it, it's not even dysregulation at that point. It's a complete collapse. And it's kind of intense of a term. I don't love it. But in the polyvagal world, they call it, and that's why they call it polyvagal, because there's those two branches. So if everyone's wondering why do they call it polyvagal theory, it's those remnants those like different fibers, those nerve fibers that are remnants evolutionarily from those two branches. And the dorsal vagus is involved in the complete collapse of our nervous system regulation. So our like our ability to do anything positive, get out of that space to problem solve. It is a very primitive response of just hiding out and not being able to do anything, right?
Right.
You know, you can't even take
Right.
care of yourself. You're no
Yep.
longer thriving. Now, how that relates to pain is very interesting because people in our culture still do everything. They're
Mhm.
not sitting around doing nothing. However, the body is responding with pain signals that are so heightened, almost as like warning signs of we need to, you know, we need to get this taken care of. It's like 5 alarm emergency. But then when they get into this dorsal vagal collapse, we call it, then they don't have that anymore. They have like all of the social aspects of how chronic pain affects us. It affects mood, it affects anxiety, depression, all of those more mental health aspects of chronic pain start coming about and more in full force. On top of still having the physical aspects of it, but then you get into these cycles that are really deep, of not wanting to work anymore. But
Mhm.
then, or people maybe misjudging you, saying like, why don't you just get up and move? You don't seem sick, but you
Mhm.
really can't. And then it messes with like just your own self-perception of like, okay, why can't I do the things that I like? Since I can't do them, I'm just gonna like, like not have a purpose or not have as much motivation. And that's really where I love working at that intersection between the body and the mind. So a lot of my career has been, how do we help those people get out of that state?
So can somebody go in and out of that state? So like those are what flare-ups might look like for some of those people.
Yeah. And actually, if you really look at the definition of health, we should never think that we're only on one level. We should never just be at ventral vagus. Everything, through rose-colored glasses, everything perfect. Actual health is the flexibility to move through the everything's happy, everything's perfect in our bodies, to that fight or flight stage, to that dorsal vagus sometimes, and bounce back out of it. Now, what's
Mhm.
interesting about polyvagal theory is that you have to go through the fight or flight stage in order to get back into, and think of it as a ladder. So the top rung is the most connected, everything is perfect, ventral vagus. The middle rung is the fight or flight response, that our sympathetic system. And then the very bottom is that dorsal vagus. You want to be able to jump. You can't jump over, but you want to be able to climb through all of those different stages and do them quickly, like relatively. There's no time frame. Let's say like it's not like in seconds, but within a day, someone who has persistent pain may go through all of those stages. They may start off really well connected. They may go through something midday that feels more like, okay, I'm panicky. I feel like something's happening in my body. And then by an hour later, they could be in dorsal vagus, like just that not feeling really in control of their body and their mind anymore. But then
Mhm.
how do we get you back up through those other stages? So it's not about staying in one stage. It's about the ability to climb, even if you've descended, to climb back up, and how quickly you can do that of your own ability.
Right.
So,
Yep. And that's where there's so much to unpack there. Number one, it's what you just said at the very end, being able to get in and out of that stage of your own ability. So when you are looking for somebody to come and fix you, or you're looking for that magic pill or something like that, that is not really helping you get through that stage. You're still reliant on somebody else. You need to be able to have the tools and the knowledge to be able to get through that, and know that that fight or flight state, that is so scary for so many people. It's almost easier to stay in that freeze state. It literally is easier to stay in that freeze state than have to climb that fight or flight rung to get back to, everything is happy.
And I think that we could talk a little bit about what it feels like
Yeah.
if you have tools, right? So, both of us have tools for people to learn how to climb well. So the first time you're in fight or flight, when you have that initial injury, trauma to the body, whatever that is, that's what put you in fight or flight, right? So if you think back to what caused the back pain, what caused the autoimmune condition, sometimes that's a little bit trickier. And that's one of the things that I enjoy working with people who have fibromyalgia, because they don't always remember. They only remember that they've been in fight or flight for a really long time, but they don't remember the initial injury.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have that pain, that's just so strong and it's so protective, it's good to remember that there was a reason, there was a time that it needed to be protective. It is your body's ability to say, hey, pay attention to this. Now, why it becomes persistent is because likely we didn't pay attention to it, and
Mm-hmm.
it kept signaling for a really long time. Now, at some point, we talk a lot about how the brain, and I'm sure you talk about this too, the brain has a limbic system, which is our emotional center of the brain. And part of that is how we store some of the memories of both positive and negative, and also some of the emotions related to pain. How that relates to the vagus nerve is that some of the fibers of a lot of the cranial nerves go through the brainstem, obviously, right? So we have the vagus nerve actually comes from the front of the head, but there's some fibers of cranial nerves that go through the brainstem. It's very primitive. The brainstem is right next to the limbic system. And so the signaling of all of that is like almost instantaneous. You're getting both brain signaling into the limbic system and the vagus nerve all together.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy, like within weeks, to get into more of that dorsal vagus collapse, that like just feeling like, okay, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of here. And then the fear is that it's just going to be pain to get you out of this place. And we perpetuate it because, if you go to like a doctor, they give you medicine, they're just like, we're just going to take the pain away, but the root of what's causing it is still not addressed, right? So we've masked it by just numbing out the brain and being like, okay, you don't feel it, so that you can go about doing your tasks, but we've not really resolved the body signals. And that's what we really work on, is how do we resolve or help with body signal processing. Lots of different techniques to do that, in order to not be fearful to go through fight or flight again, and then eventually go to that, very happy, satisfied, like who you truly are meant to be, state, all the way at the top of the ladder, which is ventral vagus. So, and what's interesting is that most people think that fight or flight is health. That's what I think is the funniest. Like when I look at this and people are on pain medicines for a really long time, they think that they're at the best that they can be.
Mm-hmm.
And as we start working through the program, even while they're on medicines, they're like, oh, actually, I do feel better. There's another thing that I forgot about how good I used to be,
Right.
how good I can be, how I can be capable and independent, and actually feel that my mind isn't burdened by anxiety and depression anymore.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that it's amazing to see when people triumph over that, and they feel like themselves again, or a new version of themselves.
Yep. And yeah, so for so many of the people that I've worked with, clients that I've worked with, their fight or flight response becomes their status quo. And it is almost too scary to move out of that. Their fight or flight response is almost a protective mechanism at that point. I literally have a client right now where she's like, if I am not on alert, what if something bad happens?
Yep.
Right? Like, or if something good happens, what if something bad happens right after that? So
Yeah.
she would rather kind of stay, like her story and her emotions are that I'm safer in my fight flight bubble than being able to move up to that last rung, because she's literally forgotten what it feels like to feel safe and secure, rest and relaxed. Like that is where she wants to be. So that's a really interesting bubble to help people, or run to help people climb up out of, for sure. So for chronic pain, we kind of already touched on how the vagus nerve kind of helps you transition. It's a normal thing to transition into that rest and relaxation, fight, flight, and then freeze response. So do you feel like with chronic pain, people are living in those bottom two rungs more, or do some people just get stuck in that freeze response for years sometimes? Like, what's normal? What should people, when they're feeling like that depression, anxiety, I guess there's not really a normal, but if they're like, well, I've been here for years, is there any hope for me? What can I do to get out of this? Is there hope for
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, there is absolutely hope, because the body's designed to become flexible again, to be able to go up and down that ladder, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think of when I talk with my patients that there's always hope, because you just didn't know the skills to navigate the ladder, I call it. But
Mm-hmm.
once you know the skills and you're willing to put them to use, every single person has hope to come out of that baseline, freeze response. Um, there's not one person, if they put in that desire and effort to try, that I've not seen progress, because the brain wants that balanced homeostasis. Every single person's body wants to be out of that protective response. It's just a lot of other factors. Is it your willpower? Is it your, social economic state? Is it your education? And I like to focus on the fact that everyone, given the opportunity, given the skills, has the ability to come out of persistent pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't go so far to say that, like that you could do it without medicine or that you're cured. I think that it's really important to just be realistic and say, okay, well, this has been going on for a really long time. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know how long it'll take. We don't know. We don't know how long it takes for the body and brain to reconnect and retrain
Mm-hmm.
everything. Um, if you've been in pain for 20 plus years, I don't know. But I know that you can improve and get out of that freeze response. And once you start going past that and the body starts really being able to have fewer pain signals coming out of it, right? So the idea is that we're trying to reduce pain signals coming from the body and also improve the rate of which we process pain signals in our brain. So there's
Mm-hmm.
two things that we're trying to work on. There's so many tools, and medicine is still included within those tools. So I always tell people it's not a gimmick. It's not like snake oil. It's not like, oh, I'm going to cure you in like a year. But it's interesting because like the mindset is that people want the cure so bad that they're often ready to buy, something for, $49.99 on like whatever late night show that
Right.
they see that's telling
Right.
them. And oftentimes like they'll say, is this something that I should try? Is this something that I shouldn't try? And I always am open-minded, because you never know. And that's actually how I got into microdosing psychedelics with some of my patients in the past, because they brought it to me first. And we could
Mm-hmm.
talk about that later, but I thought it was just like crazy that they were thinking that. But when I looked at some of the science, and that's what we're meant to do as professionals, is we're supposed to look at things with open minds, but from a scientific view. And then also, just kind of speaking about finding the right practitioner, there's many doctors that don't understand the intricacies of how the body really works. They know the pharmacology of how medicines affect the body. So when you go and try to get procedures done or take medicines, when those don't work, they don't know what else next to do, which is why there's people like us where we are trying to find the solution at the root. Sometimes supplements help, sometimes medicines help, but really to understand that what we have inside of us as humans, every single human, the vagus nerve plus all the cranial nerves, plus our ability to train our brains, is really what gets us back to health. And anyone can access that with skills.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Your brain is built to change through your entire life. We thought the neuroplasticity, which is just brain change, we thought that stopped after, your early years, but it has been shown even the last few years, you can change. Now, you have like ingrained patterns, which you end up having to work against. And especially so with people with chronic pain, you have those safe patterns that you really, really want to stick with. But if you just take tiny steps out of those patterns, you can really see big, big, big changes. But it takes time. And kind of to your point about not really being able to give people a direct answer, hey, if you've been in chronic pain for 10 years, it'll take 1 year to get out. That's totally true, because everybody is so different. Their bodies are different. The way their nervous systems respond are different. And I think the most important thing is that the stories that they tell themselves are all different. So that goes into like the socioeconomic, their culture, their upbringing, what kind of people they're surrounding themselves with right now, and what they're getting told and what they hear. That all plays a huge part in how quickly and how well you can find your balance again. And then one other thing I wanted to touch on, because you're just like bringing up all of these thoughts for me, is you were saying earlier that health is being able to move through all the rungs of the ladder. And one of the things that I see a lot with my clients, and this message is for you if you feel this way, is when I am done with chronic pain, I am done with pain forever. And if I have pain again, that means I've failed my program, or I'm back to square one, or what have you. Or if I've worked hard with like a mental health therapist, or worked on my stories and my mindset, and I have a lapse, that means I've failed all of this. And that's just simply not true. That is normal. You're supposed to have almost like a 50-50 split of good and 50-50 split of bad. And being able to move through that 50-50 is really what we're built to be able to do as humans. And it's not just all rose tinted glasses or whatever. It's being able to move through the good and bad in a healthy way with good coping mechanisms.
Yeah. And
So,
I think that that's not what we're ever taught.
no.
If you think culturally, we're taught to be brave, push through. We're taught that our identity is based on what we could do to perform in all aspects. The more we perform as parents, as, caregivers, as in our jobs. I mean, our entire culture is performance based. And so what is interesting is that if you can tell yourself a story where your identity isn't resting on your performance at all, but you are valuable for who you are as a person, just because you exist, you deserve to have the most healthy, happy life, even if you didn't perform, then that is a much more positive story in which you can operate out of. Because when things don't go exactly 100% what you expected, you can navigate that saying, well, I can't perform like I used to, but I still have worth in who I am. I know who my identity is, and I'm able to do the best that I can. And then that's where you can navigate that ladder.
Yep.
You can only do the best that you can. And often the first thing that people will tell me is that they don't feel that if they can't do this activity, that they are the best that they can, right? If they can't do X, Y, Z, their identity is wrapped up in a role. And we don't have to buy into that cultural, education in that way. You don't have to. So that's where a lot of my work starts, is just helping people know that because you exist, you are worth something, even if you don't perform your role to what you used to do.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter. Everybody has intrinsic worth.
Yeah.
So you were born with it. It stays with you your whole life. You have it. It's there.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of move on a little bit and talk about some ways and tools that you can modulate your vagus nerve. So I've seen different things, and I'm sure you've seen different things, as well as people listening. kind of weird things about how to modulate vagus nerves, like singing, dancing, all that stuff, which one, I don't know if it modulates the vagus nerve, but if you are doing those things and it makes you feel good, that's just releasing all sorts of endorphins. Like, I don't know if it's very specific to the vagus nerve itself, but man, like those are just good things to do. Get your body moving, get your brain out of certain funks. But I wanted to see if you have any specific vagus nerve hacks or tricks that you tell your patients or you teach your clients on how to do when they're stuck in that freeze response.
Yeah, so the Vegas polyvagal community, keep in mind that the person that developed it is a psychologist. So he's looking at it from more of a mental health aspect of how we connect. And how they call it attunement is the mental health word for being able to connect well with yourself and others. So attunement, meaning like you're fully tuned into who you are and then who other people are. I love all of that. I'm all about that mental health aspect. However, when we look at where the vagus nerve actually goes, they do have, because like he's looking at the branches, the evolutionary branches, but they're not there anymore, right? So we don't have a direct connection to the vagus nerve isn't connected as directly to like our throat. We actually have cranial nerves that do those parts. So we have 12 of them, and other cranial nerves do other things. Now they all go through the same area. So one would say that whenever any one is activated, all of them are activated. That's kind of how electrical signals work, on a physiological level. So when we look at how to do certain vagus nerve exercises, I don't call them that because I call them what they're designated through. So for example, some of my favorite ones are related to our upper trap and this muscle right here, which is the sternocleidomastoid. That is accessory nerve number 11, the one right next to the vagus nerve. So accessory nerve goes to this muscle and the upper trap because evolutionarily we needed to protect our neck if there was some kind of creature coming at us, So all mammals have this ability to tighten up those neck muscles. It is our first clue that we may be stuck in fight or flight when these are really tight. And this is really tight. And so just really easy tip for anyone who is watching and want to start working on it's under polyvagal theory, but I would say that it's really the accessory nerve. So take it for what it is. To work on this area that is having a primitive fight or flight response, it's very simple. You can hold in a couple of areas. And these are exercises that I've created more so than what Stanley Rosenberg did. He does a really great one, but and he involves the eyes, which is ocular motor. But they all lump it under polyvagal. So kind of keep that in mind. But I don't use the eyes right away because like people may not be able to actually do that as well. I do look at visual tracking as part of my assessment, but real simple, what you're going to do is the sternocleidomastoid actually rests behind the ear. And I like to hold things versus like massage everything to death. It's not, if you're thinking about signaling, it's not about the muscle that we're changing or the tendon. We're actually, think of it as a toddler who may be having a temper tantrum and you're wanting to hold them so that they don't hurt themselves. That's what I think about when we have very tight responses in these primitive muscles, right? So little different than, it's not a massage. So you're going to take your fingers here and you could do it on both sides and you're just going to pull forward towards the jaw. And then usually I just hold the jaw as well. So you're going to just hold where this, you'll feel it. It's kind of ropey. You pull forward with flat fingers. So you're not digging into that muscle, but you're just pulling forward and you just hold. And that's something easy that actually helps regulate a cranial nerve. So what I found to be the best is to really, and what I studied after I found Polyvagal is to really understand how all the cranial nerves affect how we go on that ladder. And the cranial nerves are very primitive. They're on all the time, protecting us. And so if they're in overprotection mode, you need to be working on some part of the cranial nerve system. And that's where a lot of the Eastern philosophy medicines really got it right, in the sense that a lot of acupressure points are
Mhm.
along a lot of the innervation for the cranial nerves. So
Yep.
I take a lot of, my grandma was a Chinese healer. So what she taught me, I actually understand better why they do what they do. And
Hmm.
so, when we think about, like there's a spot right up here that's like related to like one of our ventricles in our brain that actually can get inflamed. It's just very interesting, like how there's a lot of science behind some of the ancient wisdom that's out there. But I'm trying to marry both of them in my practice, and that's an easy one right there. Another easy one, and this is actually also an acupressure. Very simple, upper trap, also accessory nerve, which is cranial nerve number 11. All you do, flat hand over where it's tight, and you squeeze, like you just squeeze your fingers
Hmm.
to your palm, and you just squeeze and you hold. Now, if you want to make it a little bit more related to how your eyes move, you actually can turn your head, and like your eyes will track with that. So you turn towards the side that you're holding. So that
Okay.
gives you a little bit more of ocular motor
Okay.
too. Yeah.
Great.
So vagus nerve directly, this is the one thing that I know for sure, is that we have fibers that go directly to our heart. So heart rate variability is definitely truly related to our vagus nerve. And Stephen Porges does talk about that. And I wholeheartedly agree that if you aren't using some program to look at heart rate variability, that almost every single person should.
Hmm.
And
How does, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say, do you use that for yourself or your patients?
I don't a lot actually. So, and actually, I was just going to ask if you can go into that a little bit with like the heart rate variability. I know a lot of like apps nowadays, like if you have a fancy watch and things like that, will actually give you your HRV, and things like that. Basically, it's just like how you recover and whatnot. But if you can go into that a little bit more, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so heart rate variability is different than heart rate. So like heart rate is supposed to be, like 60, 70 beats per minute, sometimes 80 if you're really high. Some people are really low at like 50s if you're an athlete. Heart rate itself is its own thing, but there's a little, and I'm not a like cardio like expert, so there's a little blip in like how they measure the heart rate variability, meaning like there's like some peak in how they do heart rate in the little EKG that they
Uh-huh.
measure from here, this little peak, whatever it is, to another peak. And that measurement is should be variable, meaning it should be able to change. If it doesn't change and it stays still, and is not variable, that is now equated in scientific literature for the last 20 years with increased chronic conditions, such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, increased risk of stroke, obesity. So a lot of those chronic conditions are related to if that time frame between that little peak and the other peak is not able to change. So
Mhm.
whenever we exercise, that decreases that little peak. Like, if we're sitting still, it's like this. When we run, it should look like this. And then our recovery time back to its original place is what we're looking at too. So there's like mathematical calculations, a formula that allows us to know how quickly we get back to our baseline.
Mhm.
And that's the variability, right? Like how much can it change into a shorter distance from peak to peak, back into our regular baseline, back into even like a more broadened baseline, like say we're resting or in meditation. So
Mhm.
that's how they've combined it with more of a meditative state, is that that's part of the variability. You should be able to make the variation of your heart rate go quite a bit more when you're exercising, but also have it slow down. So there's just uh, enough science behind it now to say that you can train it. And when they train, any of the programs out there that train it, it's trying to slow down your actual heart rate in order to lengthen that variability. And then when you go about your business, it should, be able to, like an accordion, go back to more fast paced. So but you could also do it just by starting to exercise.
Mhm.
You could go the other way too. So that's why I tell people, like, before you buy any equipment, just know that anytime that you're walking and you're starting to increase like just your pace a little bit, and like doing that more frequently is the variability. If
Yeah.
you did like a walk every day, but previous to that you were sitting on your couch, that walk every day is making your heart rate variable. And it's free, and you don't even need to have anything measuring that. Just know that that's what they're really measuring, is like how frequently we change
Yeah.
our heart rate.
So essentially, from what I'm hearing, is basically being able to go from a resting state to an active state, and doing that frequently, switching that on and off frequently throughout
Mhm.
the day
Yeah.
will help you improve your heart rate
Yeah,
variability.
so that's the easy version. The harder version, which is even more related to the vagus nerve, is the ability to slow down our heart rate, be in that more meditative state, and then be able to come out of that to our daily activity, right? So how quickly can we go into a meditative state, a resting state, and then come out of it? Um, I would say that probably 90% of the people with persistent pain have no clue how to get into a resting state or a meditative state, because the pain is so prevalent. But you
Mhm.
can still train that. It just takes time.
Yep.
And that's actually how I ended up doing neurofeedback or biofeedback for the brain, is to help the brain help out to control how we get into that more meditative state.
Well, that's an awesome segue into some of the biofeedback stuff that you're doing,
Yeah.
because I'd love to hear more about that. But on kind of just to wrap that little piece up, I think everybody with chronic pain has heard that you need to meditate more and you need to exercise more and you need to do both. And people are like, none of that is helping my pain. I don't feel any effects from it. And this is literally the scientific reason why you need to be doing those things. Is actually, it's not, it is a direct effect to your vagus nerve, which affects your freeze, fight, flight, and then rest, relaxation response. So if you can start training, it's not going to be an immediate response. When you meditate once, your pain is not going to go away. It might if you're really, really lucky, but it's more of a training your body how to, like you said, move through those rungs,
Mm-hmm.
and that is true health. So that is a really fantastic tool. So this side of the spectrum of the rest, relaxation, that meditation piece, and then slowly building, and you're working your way up to some sort of exercise program that suits you, that works for you, that doesn't set off your alarms. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But let's kind of dive into the biofeedback work that you're doing, because I know
Yeah.
we've talked about it kind of before, and it's super interesting, and I'd love for people to hear about that.
Well, it really came from this idea of how do we help people get into meditation when they're in pain?
Mhm.
Because you're not relaxed, you can't empty out your brain. It is sitting still is probably the last thing you want to do, because that's when the pain might be the most prevalent. So, harnessing the brain waves that we have in order to help with training is really what biofeedback is. So we have 4 different brain waves: um, alpha, delta, theta, and beta. We have more. We have gamma, and there's, some other ones that we haven't named yet in the neuroscience space. But really, that's what we look at from an EEG standing. So that's electroencephalography. So, different electrodes. It's not invasive, but, you put electrodes on different parts of your head, and we can measure the frequency of the electricity at that time. And different frequencies are what the waves are called.
Mhm.
are named after. So alpha waves are kind of like a mid frequency wave. It's usually from 8 hertz all the way up to 14 hertz. Beta waves are thinking brain waves, and that goes from 14 hertz all the way to like 20 some hertz. We even have a high version of that, like a extra beta wave. And then theta and delta waves. Delta waves are related to sleep. Theta waves are really related to our sense of self. So I work in the theta wave and alpha wave. So low frequency waves, I do actually work on as well, because sleep is very much affected by pain. And then I
Mhm.
work on helping people with their alpha waves, essentially, to
Mhm.
start off with. Now, there's a lot of not customized programs that actually help with meditation. We use different headbands and tools. You can get just yourself. They cost probably around $200 to $300 that just work on alpha waves. But I tell people, if you've had persistent pain, you may need to have someone actually do an assessment and see what the different brain waves are doing, because it's not just the alpha wave that may need training. But everyone, if you're going to biohack yourself, you can get these things yourself. And any device out there that's meant for like the machine that we use is actually a headband called Muse, and you can actually use their programs that they have. We have a specialized program called Mind Lift. It's spelled MYND Lift, LIFT, and that program is customizable to actually measure the different brain waves, and then I create a program based off of that program. But we use the headband because built in it is the electrode, so it makes it really easy for people to use it. And they have a meditation program that's just alpha brainwave training. So if people aren't ready to start a program with me, I could just say, hey, just buy the headband. You can just use the program that's on there that's already built in to still get alpha brainwave training. And that's the idea of being able to get into more of a meditative state from your brain by
Mhm.
just watching TV. So essentially, you're just watching videos, you're watching or listening to music. And what's amazing about neuroplasticity, so the brain being able to change, is that when you set the frequency at a certain range and the brain isn't reaching that frequency, it'll say, oh, well, I'm not there. And so then we keep putting in that stimuli of the same frequency, and it'll gradually match it. If you do that every day, then it becomes a new feedback loop to match that frequency where we want it to be. So if you're low in your alpha waves, you can train your brain, and the headband or neurofeedback itself isn't putting a signal into your brain. It's not transmagnetic stimulation. So it's not actual, like, that's a whole different thing. I don't do that. I think that there's a lot of benefit to that, but that's actually a whole different category. I
Mhm.
love seeing people being able to harness their own brain power to make changes. And so that's essentially what you're doing, is that over time, over like a 3-month period, you can train those waves to change.
Yeah. And I think that philosophy, the neurofeedback, the biofeedback piece, is very much in line with how we approach chronic pain, as in we're teaching people how to help themselves and we're guiding them versus giving them something completely passive where
Mhm.
they have to essentially start being reliant on something else, which is definitely not something that is it can really help, and it can be a bridge in certain instances to help them get to the point where they can be self-reliant, but ultimately they need to be able to actively move through the good and the bad and be able to get themselves out of flare-ups and pain and things like that. So that's awesome. So how long do people usually go and do this program for?
Well, the way that I do neurofeedback now is that everything's done at home except for the first assessment, which makes it really easy and much more affordable than what it used to be. We used to have people come in the office twice a week, and I don't do that anymore.
Mhm.
And I changed over during the pandemic for that reason, because obviously you have to come up with new resources. So the system that we use now, it allows, because people are training every day at home, the results are phenomenal. like way faster. So
Mhm.
before, when I would answer that question, I'd say definitely 3 to 4 months at a minimum. Now
Mhm.
it's between 1 to 3 months. I still prefer people to give their brain enough time to create a new feedback loop, which statistically speaking takes about 3 months to solidify it. But we're seeing actual progress. And specifically when we're looking at brainwaves, there's different brainwave profiles that are related to anxiety, depression, memory, focus, attention issues. So when we look at the whole spectrum of what pain affects, it affects all of those areas as well. So when people are thinking for themselves, okay, the physical part of me doesn't bother me as much as the brain fog or my inability to concentrate or the fact that I'm so fearful that the pain's going to ramp up, that's the perfect time to start biofeedback, because it's more of those aspects that um, are related to how you interact with yourself mentally and
Mhm.
emotionally. And
Mhm.
that is a really important part not to ignore, because it's
Mhm.
not just in the body, it's not just training the body and to get out of pain, it's also that mental health aspect. So it really is, I don't know, it's both. It's, whenever you train the alpha waves, you are getting that vagus nerve to be trained as well. So it is happening in your body. But I would say that the majority of people, when they're feeling that anxiety, that low state, those circulating thoughts, those, those things that come with having been in pain for so long that you just feel burdened by, um, that can make a big difference, the biofeedback, the neurofeedback. So, but it takes a while. It takes 3 months, I would say, to really
Mhm.
change some of those patterns of thinking.
Yeah. And just remember, I mean, everybody's looking for that one magic pill that takes away your pain tomorrow, but these are chronic issues. Like you've had these issues for months, years, maybe even decades, and that's
Mm-hmm.
most likely not going to go away overnight because your brain and your body has adapted. So you need to adapt it to a new state. And that's basically what the biofeedback is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool. So if you have time, I'd like to touch on some of the microdosing stuff that you've
Yeah.
dove into, because we alluded to that at the very beginning. And like one thing I will say is this is a really hot topic, I guess, or field that there is a ton of scientific research actually being done on it. Places like Yale, Harvard, Stanford, like they're doing a ton of really cool research on microdosing for not only chronic pain, but for things like depression, anxiety, using like psilocybin, ketamine, things like that. It's really interesting to kind of follow along. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it too.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, it was because about, I would say, 7 years ago, when a few of my patients, um, back in where I used to practice in Missouri, found a source. And they found that when they dosed my psilocybin, which is mushrooms, magic mushrooms, that they had less pain. And they
Mhm.
were going through my program and they were like, what is going on? I don't know why I feel better, but I do. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. So let's look into this. Back then, there was not as much, almost a decade ago, not as much research. It wasn't quite a hot topic. And there's the legal aspect of it, right? And
Mhm.
in most states, it's still not legal to have or possess any of the substances. So psilocybin, LSD, MDMA. In Oregon right now, it's decriminalized, which makes it a lot easier, meaning that you can have it in your own possession. You can't sell it. You can't, create a company that is like,
Based off that.
you know,
Yeah. Mhm.
doing that, but it makes it a lot easier for people to have it and use it for themselves. Now, microdosing is different because when they came to me and they had macrodosed, I thought that was very fascinating. I've had my own personal experiences with psychedelics. So it was easy for me to take some of the experiences I've had in the past, whether they were good or bad, and just kind of understand a little bit, okay, what is happening in the brain when that happens? On um, a macro scale, right? So if you take like a psychedelic dose and you're feeling beyond yourself, right? You're having that effect of mind altered state. It really changes your body's ability to use serotonin. So how it relates to pain is that oftentimes people who have chronic pain, they're also put on an anti-anxiety or antidepressant because that kind of goes hand in hand. A lot of those, a lot of the biochemistry behind that is there's such a depletion of or inability to use serotonin. And there's a lot of variation in the dopamine in our bodies when we have persistent pain. No matter what diagnosis you have, my primary focus when I was working with people was fibromyalgia, and within that fibromyalgia autoimmune condition category, so much imbalance between dopamine and serotonin. But psychedelics allow for the body to actually use the serotonin that's in the system and create new receptors for it, as well as new synapses whenever we're talking about creating new feedback loops. So it's almost like if you think of the brain as soil, it is making the soil as hospitable for whatever you want to change in the brain. And that's why, you know, people have visions and they see different things if they're on a macrodose. Now, the reason why I chose to go towards microdose is because you can do everything without any psychedelic effect. You can, all the daily activities, drive, talk to people, go to work. It's 1/100th of the amount that you would normally take to get a psychedelic dose. But it does change the serotonin in your body and your ability to use what you have without messing with, it is your own own serotonin versus if you took an anti-anxiety or antidepressant, it is synthetic. It's a lot of them are SSRIs, which is a reuptake inhibitor, meaning that it's trying to keep your serotonin in your body longer. But the way that they do that is a mechanism that's not in our body. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the psychedelics, whenever you're microdosing it, it allows you to use the serotonin that you have at a pace that your body can do that probably was not there before without having to use that alternative mechanism that's not natural to us.
Right. Gotcha. So that's really interesting. And so for those of you listening, the serotonin and dopamine are basically your feel-good hormones, neurotransmitters. So those are super important for you to get to that like ventral vagal or rest relaxation, parasympathetic system response. In that system, for so many people with chronic pain or chronic depression, anxiety, it's just completely out of whack, just like you were saying. So with a microdosing, it's if you do a search online, like a lot of the big like podcasters and things like that are actually really talking about it, like health podcasters. But I do want to put out the caveat that we are not saying don't go get arrested for getting some of this stuff.
Nope. Yeah, you need to have a reliable source. You
Yes.
need to have someone teach you how to dose.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't even know the parameters, so that's important.
Yeah,
If
and
you're
have it supervised, especially if it's your first time doing it, because these are, at the end of the day, I mean, we're starting to do research on it, but we are not 100% sure. There's still drugs that are more naturally occurring and things like that, but there are still substances that are altering your own body's chemistry. So you do definitely want to make sure that if this is something that you're interested in doing, that you are doing it under good, proper supervision, not your buddy's friend babysitting you.
Yeah, and don't take any like baggie from a guy in a corner. Like, don't do that either. Like, there are reliable sources that are out there, and it took a while for me when I came out here, moved my practice out here, to find a reliable source that I find is an actual company. It's not some person just doling out drugs. And so so that's why I've started officially teaching on microdosing for a lot of different people who are interested now. And I just started that this year. So
Yeah.
that is a course that I do. It's very much hands-on. It is walking you through that first month, the entire month that you might be microdosing. And so that's been an adventure out here for me. But I didn't want to start it until I could find a reliable source, and until for example, the source is in Oregon, and it is something that they are able to do well. And so, things are changing. The
Yep.
entire landscape is changing. Everything's becoming more accepted, or at least people are learning more about it.
Yep. And yeah, I'm excited to see what the next, 3 to 5 years really pans out to be with some of these things, and seeing if it can, replace some of the pharmacological interventions that have a lot of really bad side effects and things like that, which with microdosing, we haven't seen a ton of really bad side effects with,
Mm-mm.
especially when you're doing the microdosing piece versus the macrodosing. So I'm going to keep an eye on that, and really follow that pretty closely. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Irene, for joining me. And then I am going to post some of your links and contacts and everything in the show notes. But if you can just tell people where they can find you, either online or in person, or where to find out more about some of the biofeedback and the microdosing stuff that you do, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So my company is Minddoor is the name of it. And if you want to do neurofeedback, an option, because it can be remote, is within Washington State. I am a practitioner. I like to, even though it's not really like you need to have licensure for neurofeedback, I like to be extra safe. So I am doing that for Washington. So you can look at my website, and that's mind-door.com. And I'm sure you'll put that in the notes. I do the microdosing groups by invitation only. So the best way is to go to the website and look at my consult number and just text me. And if that's something you're interested in, I do them in certain times of the year when we have enough people to do a group. That's more like kind of exclusive. So feel free to text me. And then also with the neurofeedback, if you're interested in that, you're welcome to email me or text that consult line, and then we'll get you set up for a 20-minute free consult. And then we could talk, see if you're a good fit. So, and then my Instagram, which I do sometimes add some fun things on there, is Your Burnout Doc, which I think that that's what we're really working on, is health burnout,
Mhm.
just in all aspects of it. So, yep, Your Burnout Doc is that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time, Dr. Irene. And I will see you guys all next time, and hope you guys enjoyed. Okay, bye.
Thanks. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Pain Relief Path podcast. If you found this useful, or if you feel like someone you know would benefit from this episode, will you do me a favor and please pass it on? It would truly make my heart happy knowing that I was able to help one more person along their pain-free path. And if you're interested in learning how to start the journey on your own pain relief path, please check me out at painreliefpath.com. There, you'll be able to find details on how to start your own journey and how I can help you. Until next time, I wish you success on your path. Bye.